Hello everyone, and welcome to week 14 of English 213. I apologize for last week's technical difficulties. For some reason I could not get Blackboard to work to record these lectures, but we're back now. I hope you were able to read the poems by George Herbert, and hopefully by this time you've also listened to the wonderful podcast I was able to find and I posted on Monday. Remember, your reflection from week 13 is not due until the end of week 14 due to the obvious long delay in getting the lecture posted. This week, though, we're turning to John Milton's Paradise Lost. I've outlined selections from five of the books. I've asked you to read 5 of the books with special attention to the sections that I've outlined here. I'm also going to be introducing your second paper, which will be due on December 8th. As always, I highly encourage you to come and speak with me during my office hours so I can help you with your research. I will set up conference times when you can check in with me about your paper. I really felt like that helped many of you on your course of research. And it will be optional this time, but I will set up some conferences during next week. So this week we're going to be focusing on John Milton. Who was he? There's a picture of him here. He lived from 1608 to 1674, and he had a very troubled life. He set out, though, from the beginning to become a great poet. It was his great ambition to write the great epic of English poetry. And as we've come to realize, the real backstory to English history is the Arthurian legend. And originally, that's what John Milton planned to write. But when he did finally write his epic, which he did, and it is one of the most beloved epics of the world, and definitely the most beloved of English literature, it's Paradise Lost, and it was about the fall of man, not about the great history of England. And many people see this as a direct result as the tragedies that Milton suffered in his life, but also as a result of the changes that were occurring in England, the really intense changes that were happening. Milton went blind, and most of Paradise Lost was written through dictation. Paradise Lost was not the last book that he wrote either. After he finished Paradise Lost, he also wrote Paradise Regained. He also wrote, sorry, I'm trying to find my notes, sorry. Paradise Regained, and also one other text that I cannot find the connection to. So sorry. Paradise Regained, though, was about when Jesus is wandering in the wilderness for 40 days, and it uses that as really a metaphor for talking about man's striving for using his free will to strive to make intellectual decisions. So Milton was using these metaphors of Christianity as a way to really process and understand what was going on in England at the time. The other epic he wrote was Samson Agonistes, which was also talking about a struggle that man was having. So Paradise Lost, though, is the text we're going to be focusing on this week, and I highly recommend reading more Milton. There's a reason why he's thought of as one of the most incredible poets that's ever written in English. People often are assigned Paradise Lost and think, oh my gosh, how am I going to ever read this, or I already know that story. Well, the truth is, Milton is not, he's not following Christianity exactly. In fact, he was very unorthodox in a number of his points. And he really gives characters like Eve a whole new perspective. So it's a really worth your time going in and losing yourself in reading this text. It was published between 1667 and 1674. The form, as I've mentioned, is an epic poem, and it's organized into 12 separate books. We're only going to be reading books 1, 2, 4, 8, and 9, but you're more than welcome to read more. In fact, if you are choosing this as your the topic you're going to be writing your paper on, I highly recommend reading the whole book. The poem is modeled on Virgil's Aeneid, or Homer's Odyssey. It's modeled on the epic format, the format that the ancient Greeks used as a way of telling heroic stories as a means of history. And there's a lot of conventions in epic poetry, just like there's conventions in the form of the sonnet. The epic has many conventions that Milton is playing around with in this poem. And it's important to look at that as, especially if you're doing that as your paper topic. One thing to think about is the subject matter that he's writing about. So the whole summary of this book is Satan is expelled from heaven. Satan was once an angel, and Satan is expelled from heaven, and so he vengefully tempts Adam and Eve, leading to the expulsion of the first people from paradise. It's a story we've all heard before, but the way he tells it is very different, and the way Satan approaches a character is very different. So it's worth really walking into this with an open mind. The most important theme that's going to come up is that of free will. The idea that Adam and Eve made a choice, that Satan made a choice to leave and go to hell, not really understanding what hell was like before he got there, but definitely he made a choice, that humans ultimately have free will, and that's an important thing to think about as you're reading this. Some of the passages that I wanted you to look at include in books 1 and 2. The first passage is in book 1, lines 24 to 26. The second one is book 1, lines 254 to 263. And these are both in the beginning when we're talking about in book 1, Satan and his fellow rebels awaken hell and build the palace of pandemonium and sit in council. And in the first quote, we hear that to the height of this great argument I may assert eternal providence and justify the ways of God to men. And the second quote is, the mind is its own place, in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. This has been requoted before. This is a very famous passage. This is from book 1, 254 to 63. And it is a plea to realize where that no matter where you are in your mind, it can be just as terrible. Book 2 includes the passage 146 through 149. Who would lose, though full of pain, this intellectual being, these thoughts that wander through eternity, to perish rather? In book 3, you're not reading it, but there's also another section. Book 3, lines 1 through 3. So back to book 2. Book 2 is talking about the fallen angels, and they're debating how best to retaliate against or appease God. So this is Satan and all the other fallen angels. Satan embarks for the newly created earth to seek revenge. At the gates of hell he meets sin and dirt. In book 3, Satan's journey is observed from heaven. The Son offers to sacrifice himself to redeem humankind from the sin into which Satan will lead it. In chapter 3, book 3, lines 98 through 99, I made him just and right, sufficient to have stood, though free to fall. So that's the idea of God making his Son, Jesus, right and just, but with the ability to fall. just like man. When we get to book 4, you want to pay attention to book 4, lines 73 to 78. And book 4 is Satan reaches the garden and plots to make Adam and Eve sin by eating from the tree of knowledge. On his first attempt to seduce Eve in her sleep, he is apprehended by the angel Gabriel. So book 4 is a really great book. Book 4, lines 73 to 78. Me miserable, which way shall I fly? Infinite wrath and infinite despair. Which way I fly is hell. Myself am hell, and in the lowest deep, a lower deep, still threatening to devour me opens wide, to which the hell I suffer seems a heaven. There's a lot of this metaphor happening. The idea of the eternal, the internal heaven and hell that one holds in their possession. In chapter 4, we also have line 110, evil be thou my good, and then lines 299 to 301, for contemplation he and valor formed, for softness she and sweet attractive grace, he for God only, she for God in him. That's talking about Adam and Eve. In chapter 4 also we have lines 741 to 750. Nor turned I, ween, Adam from his fair spouse, nor Eve the rites mysterious of connubial love refused. Whatever hypocrites austerely talk of purity and place and innocence, defaming as impure what God declares pure, and commands to some, leaves free to all. Our Maker bids increase. Who bids abstain but our destroyer? Foe to God and man? Hail wedded love, mysterious law. So this is Milton's plea to not think poorly of sex, that what Adam and Eve were doing in the Garden of Eden was exactly what God wanted, to create more Adams and Eves. And that the idea of being ashamed of it is actually the work of the devil. Book 6, which we won't be reading, there is a passage 145 to 148, but just to give you a recap, Book 5, which we aren't reading, in Book 5, Raphael dines with Adam and Eve and tells them the story of Satan's rebellion in heaven. In Book 6, Raphael tells of the war in heaven and the expulsion of Satan and the rebel angels by the Son of God. Then in Book 7, Raphael tells of the creation of the world in 6 days. Then in Book 8, Adam tells Raphael of his own creation and meeting with Eve. And in Book 8, we see 270 to 273. But who I was, or where, or from what cause, knew not. To speak I tried, and forthwith spake. My tongue obeyed, and readily could name whatever I saw. This is Adam coming into being. Also, lines 546 to 56 in chapter 8. When I approach her loveliness, so absolute she seems, and in herself complete, so well to know her own, that what she wills to do or say seems wisest, virtuous, discreetest best. All higher knowledge in her presence falls degraded. Wisdom in discourse with her loses discountenance, and like folly shows authority and reason on her weight, as one intended first, not after, made occasionally. Then in chapter 9, Satan returns in the guise of a serpent and tempts Eve to eat the forbidden fruit. Learning what she's done, Adam consents to eat as well. They fall victim to lust, shame, and mutual recrimination. But it's important in this section that they both choose. This choice to eat the fruit. In Book 9, you want to pay attention to lines 25 to 33. Since first the subject for heroic song pleased me long choosing, and beginning late, not sedulous by nature to indite wars, hitherto the only argument heroic deemed chief mastery to dissect, with long and tedious havoc, fabled nights and battles feigned. The better fortitude of patience and heroic martyrdom unsung. Then lines 780 to 84. Forth reaching to the fruit, she plucked, she ate. Earth felt the wound, and nature from her seat, sighing through all her works, gave signs of woe that all was lost. And that's the moment when Eve eats the fruit. Finally, lines 911 through 916. Should God create another Eve, and I another rib afford? Yet loss of thee would never from my heart. No, no, I feel the link of nature draw me, flesh of flesh, bone of my bone thou art, and from thy state mine never shall be parted, bliss or woe. In Book 10, Satan returns in triumph to hell, but he and his devils are transformed into snakes. Adam and Eve bemoan their state. In Book 11, the angel Michael tells Adam and Eve that they must depart from paradise. First, he reveals to Adam the future of humankind. And then in Book 12, Michael continues his revelation, including the coming of Christ. Hand in hand, Adam and Eve depart from paradise. So when you do your reflection for this week, what I'd like you to do is to use evidence from the text to answer these questions. To what extent is Milton's Satan a sympathetic character? When does he cease to be so? How does Milton depict the fall of man? Does he blame the fall on Eve? How does Eve's account of her awakening and her first encounter with Adam in Book 4 sort with Adam's version of the same events in Book 8? And then finally, what view does Milton present in regards to free will in Paradise Lost? Please make sure when you answer the questions that you're showing me that you understand the content of of Paradise Lost. So use quotations from the text to support what you're saying. Finally, I want to assign your second paper. It's going to be due December 8th. Sorry, there is a typo here. You'll see at the bottom it says December 8th. Your second paper, you're going to answer one of the following two questions. The first one is to explore the history of the epic form in poetry. Compare Milton's Paradise Lost with another epic poem, such as the Fairy Queen, or a non-English version, such as the Odyssey. How did Milton adapt the form to write about Christianity? You can also compare Paradise Lost to Beowulf if you really like that text. The second option, if you're not really into the epic poem, is to compare a poem by John Donne to a poem from an early part of English literature. How does Donne approach love and or religion in different ways than his predecessors? You cannot write about the poem that you did a close reading on for week 12. I want to make sure that you're really exploring it in depth and really getting to know the poem. So just check in with me if you have any questions about that. Your paper needs to be in correct MLA format. There were some issues with some papers that were turned in from the last batch. Please make sure you come see me if you have questions. You can also go to Al Purdue. I have the links in our last paper that I posted, but I will post them when I post the assignment. I will post links to Al as well so that you can review what a formatted paper should look like. Your paper should be 5 to 6 pages in length, and it should be written in Times New Roman 12-point font. All papers are due by December 11th at 11:59 p.m. All right, guys, next week we're moving on to the Restoration in the 18th century. You're going to be reading selections from Aphra Behn. You're going to read her biography, and then you're going to read Oroonoko, which is a really interesting text, and then we're going to have a conversation, and you'll take a quiz on the Restoration, and hopefully you'll be working on your papers. That's it. If you have any questions, please come see me in office hours or shoot me an email. I look forward to seeing you online.